My name is Maarika, and I'm the DevOps manager at Powell's Books in Portland. And I'm here today to talk to you about communities in general and the CoffeeOps community specifically. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about various other communities that I'm a member of, talk about some of the health benefits of community membership, and then finally try and convince you to join a community of your choosing. But first, for those of you who are not familiar with CoffeeOps, it is a lean coffee style meetup that happens about every other week that is loosely focused on DevOps topics. Attendees show up, build an agenda on the spot, and start talking. There's a little bit of structure to make sure that the conversation keeps moving, but the structure never takes away from the conversations themselves. When I say loosely focused on DevOps topics, what I mean is that although most folks who show up to CoffeeOps have some interest in DevOps or software delivery, some of the most interesting conversations I've had in CoffeeOps have had nothing to do with DevOps. So this is an actual assortment of conversation topics that have come up in CoffeeOps in the Portland and Seattle groups over the last couple of months. And as you can see, the yellow sticky notes represent topics that are more technical, and the green sticky notes are just interesting things to talk about. And as you can see, there's a fair mix of both. And I have to point out, I think my favorite topic is the one right in the middle. Computers were a mistake. I've been going to CoffeeOps for about 3 years now, and the first CoffeeOps I ever attended was actually at DevOpsDays a few years ago. But in the before times, CoffeeOps always happened in person, but since the pandemic, at least the Portland and the Seattle CoffeeOps have been virtual. And I actually really appreciate that because they happen on alternating weeks. And so that means that I can attend either or both, depending on my schedule. Although I wish I could have attended a little bit more regularly over the last few years, CoffeeOps has become really important to me, and I do consider myself a part of the community. So let's define community before we go any further. Community is a group of people with diverse characteristics who are linked by social ties, share common perspectives, and engage in joint action in geographical locations or settings. So this is the working definition that I'm going to use during this talk. So why do I care so much about community? Why am I up here speaking on this topic? Well, you might not realize this just by looking at me, but I actually identify as a third-generation immigrant. All of my grandparents are from the country of Estonia, and I identify as an Estonian American. I grew up speaking Estonian in my household, and I now speak Estonian with my own 2 children. I grew up dancing with the Portland Estonian folk dance troupe, singing in Estonian choirs, attending Estonian church occasionally, and also playing in my family's Estonian band. And so the origin of the Portland Estonian community actually dates back to about World War II. So during World War II, Estonia is a tiny country in Northern Europe. And it was first invaded by Russian troops, then by the Nazis, and then finally, one last time by the Russians. And horrific acts of violence were perpetrated against Estonians at this time. And so when the final wave of Russian troops were descending on Estonia, hundreds of thousands of Estonians fled for their lives. They were war refugees. And my grandparents were part of this exodus. They were teenagers at the time. And 2 of my grandparents first fled to Sweden, and from there to Canada. And my other 2 grandparents met at a displaced persons camp in Europe and then moved to Oregon. Estonian immigrants settled all over the world. And in bigger cities, they formed really active, vibrant immigrant communities, including establishing churches, community centers, as I said, dance groups and choirs, and weekly Estonian school for the kids. And there are Estonian communities all up and down the west coast of the US and Canada. So not only in Portland, but also there is an Estonian community here in Seattle, also in Vancouver, BC, San Francisco, and LA. And I'm sharing all of this to highlight that when it comes to communities, immigrant communities are actually really special and unique. In the Estonian community, and I have actually heard that this is also true in some other immigrant communities, every woman in the community who is my mom's age or older, I refer to as an auntie. And every man in the community who is my dad's age or older, I refer to as an uncle, even though we may have no blood relation whatsoever. And so immigrant communities, at least the Estonian community, acts for me as a really tight-knit, extended family. And it's really tightly linked to my identity. I would feel totally lost without my Estonian community. And it has really given me and enriched my life so much over the years that I want for everyone else that sense of acceptance and safety and kind of the feeling of a village, a safe place within a larger city. So that's why I feel so strongly about communities and why I'm up here talking about them today. So let's recall the definition of community. It's a group of people with diverse characteristics. So I'd like to highlight that every community, regardless of how homogeneous it may look from the outside, every community has some amount of diversity in it. And unfortunately, studies have shown that in some cases, diversity can actually make it more difficult to foster a sense of community. And that might be because it can feel difficult to feel safe and accepted by people who you perceive to be different from you. But it's imperative that community leaders acknowledge that diversity within the community and prioritize diversity and inclusion in your organizations. But I want to make a big warning sign, caution note here. D&I, or diversity and inclusion efforts, can go horribly sideways unless they are approached with humility and a sense of curiosity and openness and willingness to learn and iterate. And so on this topic, I want to talk briefly about my experience as a volunteer with the PDX Women in Tech organization. So I was a volunteer with PDX WIT a few years ago. PDX WIT's mission statement is to advance inclusivity, diversity and inclusion in Portland's tech industry and in the tech industry in general. So PDX WIT has a very active community with lots of events and programs throughout the year. And one of the things that they do annually is send out a survey called the State of the Community Survey. And it's been running since 2017, and the first couple of years, this survey was just something that the founder of PDX WIT came up with on her own. She is a white, cis, woman identifying person, and she put together the survey questions and sent the survey out and kind of had some help analyzing the data. And in the first few years, the data was, the responses to this survey were reported based on like a gender breakdown. So how different questions were answered based on whether the respondent was a man or a woman. And as you'll notice, that's a pretty binary gender breakdown. And so in those first few years, that was the way that the survey responses were reported. In 2019, the State of the Community Survey got a major overhaul. And in particular, survey respondents were given the opportunity to identify based on much more inclusive racial, ethnic, and gender identities. And the survey questions that were asked in the survey started to get more at the experiences of the more marginalized folks in the community. And what came out of the survey responses was really striking. They found that current tech industry power structures have defined and funded diversity and inclusion initiatives that benefit white and cis individuals. I'm going to repeat that because it bears repeating. Current tech industry power structures have defined diversity and inclusion initiatives that benefit white and cis individuals. And I'm going to give some examples of this, but before I do, I just want to give some terms. I want to define some terms. So BIPOC in the slides going forward refers to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. GNC stands for gender nonconforming, and D&I stands for diversity and inclusion. So survey respondents were asked, would you recommend someone from an underrepresented group in tech to work at your company? And as you'll see, BIPOC and trans and or gender nonconforming folks are half as likely as their white and cis counterparts to answer yes. Similarly, when asked, do you feel your company is authentically taking steps to prioritize D&I? White and cis respondents kind of generally feel that yes, their companies are authentically working on D&I. But BIPOC and trans and or gender nonconforming folks would generally disagree with that statement. And so what we find is that the diversity and inclusion language, rhetoric, and investment and efforts that most tech workplaces are investing in right now speaks more to my experience as a cis white woman than to the experiences of the most marginalized folks among us. So it's extremely important that identity-focused communities, such as PDX Women in Tech, are conscious of the different structures of oppression that are experienced by the people in their community. And this is what's called intersectionality. I'm going to repeat that because it's a definition that's really nuanced and it's important for us to understand. So intersectionality is being conscious of all of the different structures of oppression that are experienced by the people in a community. So PDX Women in Tech took the results of their own 2019 State of the Community survey, which was intended to focus on the tech industry workforce, but they actually realized that they needed to do some introspection as well. And they made some sweeping changes to their leadership team, their programming, their mission statement and values in order to better align what they were doing with what they said they wanted to accomplish. And so, for example, in July 2018, before the State of the Community survey was sent out, the 2019 State of the Community was sent out, 100% of PDX Women in Tech staff was white and 80% of the board was white. And after the survey, after some introspection and after some changes, in August 2020, 50% of the staff was BIPOC and 80% of the board was BIPOC. And they acknowledged that the PDX Women in Tech team also has a whole also has intersectional identities, including members of the LGBTQ community, as well as individuals just beginning their career and on the verge of retirement. So I share this story to illustrate that although it can be difficult and take some time to ensure that your diversity and inclusion of members in your community is actually effective, that does not give community leaders an excuse to avoid doing that work. It just means that in order to create a sense of community among a diverse group of folks, you need to make intersectionality a priority and make sure that the voices of the more marginalized people in your community are amplified. And so on this note, I do want to take a quick moment and give a shout out and a thank you to the organizers of DevOpsDays and also CoffeeOps for having a very explicit code of conduct and for actually enforcing it. Because that makes me feel more welcomed and safe in this community. So thank you. So this is the part of the talk where I start to get really sentimental about CoffeeOps. So why are communities important? Well, I care a lot about communities. Why should you care about communities, right? Let's all agree that there are multiple different facets to our well-being, not just one. And in particular, I would like to focus on 3 interlinked facets of our well-being: mental health, physical health, and emotional health. And what's interesting about these is how tightly linked they are. And what I mean by that is that when someone is experiencing really poor health in one of these areas, so for instance, let's say someone is suffering from poor mental health at a given time in their life, that can measurably negatively impact both their physical well-being as well as their emotional well-being. And so I feel like there is a lot of cultural focus, or at least understanding, of physical health. People all know that eating right and exercising is really important for their, quote, health. And I'm really pleased to see more kind of focus and discussion around mental health and how it's becoming more normalized. And I have actually been to multiple DevOpsDays conferences where there are discussions about things like burnout and neurodiversity. I think that's a great pattern, and it needs to continue. But what I don't hear anybody talking about is emotional health. And I think that this is a huge gap in our social and cultural understanding of holistic well-being. And that by neglecting our emotional health, we are putting ourselves at huge risk. And here's what I mean by that. Let's talk about emotional well-being. So this is just a definition. It is an overall positive state of one's emotions, life satisfaction, sense of meaning and purpose, and ability to pursue self-defined goals. And this is kind of like hard to really grasp onto. This is more helpful for me. So the extent to which an individual's emotional well-being is satisfied at any given point depends on three things: their feelings of autonomy, feelings of competence, and feelings of relatedness, i.e. connection to other people. Another way of thinking about relatedness is it's the opposite of feeling lonely. And although we all feel some amount of loneliness in our lifetimes, research has shown that prolonged loneliness and intense social isolation has been linked to really serious physical and mental health issues, including high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity, a weakened immune system, anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, and death. And furthermore, in a meta-analysis on studies of loneliness, researchers have found that living with air pollution increases your odds of dying early by 5%, living with obesity, 20%, excessive drinking, 30%, and that living with loneliness increases your odds of dying early by 45%. So this is serious business. It's really critical for us to not neglect our emotional well-being, because it can increase our risk of dying early. So it's really important for our emotional well-being that we avoid social isolation and prolonged loneliness, and that we foster deep sense of connection with other people so that our relatedness needs are met. And research has shown that the social activities that are the best predictors of having one's relatedness needs met are meaningful talk and feeling understood and appreciated by interaction partners. This is huge. Having meaningful conversations and feeling understood and appreciated by your interaction partners can reduce your likelihood of dying early. And so when I tell you that CoffeeOps is a purpose-built forum where you can have meaningful conversations and feel understood and accepted by your interaction partners, that is no small thing. And when CoffeeOps members say that at certain times in their lives, CoffeeOps acts as a lifeline for them, we mean that literally. Okay. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes from some CoffeeOps members that are anonymized and used with permission. CoffeeOps has had an important impact on my mental health. It is the singular reason I still live in Seattle. When I moved out to Seattle several years ago, it was a big move from across the country. I had no support network, no friends or family here. I was starting a new job at a new company using new tools, lots of unfamiliar stuff. I started going down a psychological spiral, drowning in imposter syndrome. I was on the brink of giving up. CoffeeOps ended up being my lifeline. The bi-weekly CoffeeOps meetups were like group therapy. I discovered that lots of other folks had imposter syndrome, and we discussed that for a long time over multiple sessions. It was transformational. It enabled me to stick it through, and since then, I've had big positive personal and career shifts. I now consider some of the CoffeeOps members to be my closest friends. Another quote. I got laid off several months ago, and I've been job hunting. CoffeeOps has been very supportive, helping me to get through it. When you feel like an idiot, and you talk to other people who you think are smart, but they also feel like an idiot, it makes you feel less alone. My call to action for everyone here is threefold. First, I want everyone to start taking their emotional well-being seriously and investing in all aspects of your well-being, emotional, mental, and physical well-being holistically. Secondly, I want everyone here to find and join a community where you feel safe, accepted, understood, and where you can have meaningful conversations about things that you care about. And finally, if you are a community leader, I really strongly encourage you to start thinking about and incorporating intersectionality into the communities that you're a leader of. I will warn you, it doesn't come entirely for free. If you remember from the definition of community, communities engage in joint action. That means you actually have to do something together with your communities in order to be a member of them. You have to show up somewhat regularly. It's really difficult to foster a sense of connection with people that you hardly ever see or with whom you interact on a really superficial level. So it will require a commitment of time, effort, and the willingness to put yourself out there. But the cost of not doing so is much greater. Consider it a vital part of your self-care routine. We all need strong emotional, mental, and physical well-being, and communities can help support all of those. CoffeeOps meetups happen all over the world, and your local group is always happy to welcome new folks. If you're interested in checking us out, you can find us at coffeeops.org. And to my CoffeeOps folks out here in the audience, I am sincerely and humbly grateful for you. Through the utter chaos of the last 3 years, including some pretty major personal life events of my own, you all have been a source of connection and stability. And you have, without a doubt, improved my own personal, emotional, mental, and physical well-being, and I am incredibly thankful. I love y'all. Thank you. I think I have time for questions if there are any. Aww, thank you.
My question is, do you have a tissue?
Oh, I'll get you one. All right, well, you can find me later if you want to talk about communities. Thanks so much.
There's one.
Oh, there's one. There's one.
Yeah, thank you for an amazing talk. I just wanted to ask you, has the experience of doing these meetups remotely changed your experience of CoffeeOps? I'm assuming that you might have done a lot of physical meetups before. So was it difficult to connect with people when you're not meeting in person and meeting over Zoom or something like that?
That is a great question. I actually feel like, so I joined the Seattle CoffeeOps during the COVID pandemic. And so I met all of the Seattle CoffeeOps folks virtually and literally have met some of those folks here at this conference for the very first time in person. And I don't feel that meeting them remotely decreased the connection that I felt with them. And that's because the conversations we were having were meaningful. And I was feeling that sense of connection with those folks even while remotely, even when we weren't face-to-face, because I felt the psychological safety and because we were meeting regularly and we were talking about things that I cared about. Yeah, thank you. All right, well, thanks everyone. Talk to me later if you want to.